Dan Ridenour. Ridenour is how you pronounce it, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Ridenour.
Thanks for being on the Leadership Lounge. So I got those 2 L's at Hobby Lobby for like $7.
I love it.
And we decided to stick with it. I wanted to bring you on because I think you have a really unique story of kind of coming from the corporate world into like running as a mayor of a town that has gone through like a massive regime change. And yeah, I want to hear your journey. And I think maybe even starting as early on as, high school, college, I'd love to hear kind of where you started and kind of your career path to where you are now.
Okay. Well, I always, excuse me, I always kind of knew that I wanted to be in the financial and or business world. I always knew that. My dad was a minister, and
really?
So we moved around a little bit as he would, like the corporate world, pastors do the same thing.
Yeah.
So often you start out as the youth minister, then you'll be the associate minister, or you might be the music minister, which is where he was, and you move yourself up. So we lived in a number of places. I was born in Indianapolis, and we were in Greenwood, and he was in a church in Danville, then he was in church in Frankfort, Indiana, over by Lafayette, and then he was at Speedway Christian back in the Indianapolis market, and then ended up at Trafalgar Christian just in Johnson County on the south end of Indianapolis. So we moved around a little bit. I was out of the home with that last one. I was long gone by then. But I always knew that I wanted to be somewhere in business, and I was good with numbers. I was always good with math. So I studied business and started at banking, IUPUI.
You went to IUPUI? Okay.
Yeah, the IU side of IUPUI. And I have a brother who, Jeff, was on the Purdue side of IUPUI, and is an engineer. But I always wanted to. I knew I was good with numbers, and I'm just very comfortable with them, and it just makes sense. I see them, I hear them, I remember them. I used to. This is way off topic, but there was a time where I knew the metropolitan populations of the 30 largest metropolitan cities in the United States, including Indianapolis, and I don't know why, but it just would stay with me. So it's a strength, and so I wanted to play to that. And I started at a finance company right out of school and was in their management trainee program, and quickly moved up and became an assistant manager in another location. So very young, I'd already moved, and then got a branch location later in Greenfield, Indiana. So I was a branch manager there. It was a very small location, but then from there I moved to a mid-sized location and back to a Lafayette location for that particular company, then an Indianapolis, what they called a super branch. So as you have success, 8 years later, you're running one of the largest, the second or third largest branch for that particular company in Indiana, and winning a lot of awards, and you start getting recruited away. Got into mortgages at that point.
Yeah.
And
what year is that approximately?
I'm going to show my age here, but that was back in the 80s. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, I graduated high school in 78.
Well, you're aging really well.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah, after being mayor for 4 years, you still have at least some youth to you. So.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. I do love the mayor job. But so I got into the mortgage and started getting into regional management, and went through 3 consecutive times to where I would build up to the point where I was over a territory. And then the company, which was smaller to mid-size, would get bought by somebody who was mid-size or larger, and they always get rid of middle management.
Yeah.
They keep the branch managers because that's the connection with the customer base, but the middle management gets so, you'd start over, go back and manage a branch. They'd say, wow, this guy performs, and give you another position and move you up. And then it happened a second time, and then the third time was here in Muncie. By then I was in Muncie working, at Mutual Bank, and over time became over the central region, which was 5 counties and several branch locations and a VP position. But I had gotten interested in local politics. Interestingly enough, to me at least, was about signs, retail and restaurant signs.
Yeah.
And driving down McGalliard, there were the ordinances allowed for signs to be on these tall poles, and it looked like an interstate exit.
Yeah.
And I and others didn't feel like it was attractive, so I started attending the variance board meetings, and we would say, hey, can you take it down 10 feet? Can you take it down 20 feet? Can you do monument signs? And with the first success that we had as a group that kind of we weren't opposed to business, but we were opposed to the look and feel of how McGalliard was becoming. So the one that kind of tipped me over the top was Panda Express.
Yeah.
Their sign is actually higher than the Walmart. They're in the Walmart parking lot, and higher than the Lowe's, which is right next door. And I just didn't feel like that was appropriate. Started looking into who makes these ordinances, how all this worked.
Yeah.
My old high school civics started coming back, and I thought, oh, local government. Well, I then looked up where do I live, and actually ended up running for council and lost by a few votes that first time. This was back in 07, I guess, something like that, 05 or 07.
Where do you live in Muncie?
We live in the center part of the city. We're in what would be the Minnetrista neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we're right on McCullough Boulevard, right on the White River Greenway. We bought an old house. It had been foreclosed. It had been converted into 4 apartments. We unconverted it, and so we love it.
I love that area.
It's a block and a half from Minnetrista. It's actually a block from Minnetrista, a block and a half from Muncie Central, and 29 steps to the White River Greenway, which then connects to the Cardinal Greenway. And as a runner, that was a big bonus for me.
That's a great exercise path, just biking and running.
Absolutely.
And stuff. I put in a lot of miles on there. Yeah.
So, but while I was at Mutual, so I was at Mutual, I was in my position, and I said, is it possible I can run for city council? And they said, well, you can't do any council business at the office. And I said, I promise. And they allowed me to do that, and I kept business apart and wouldn't vote on anything that had to do with Mutual or anything that might have a conflict. And during my time on council is when some of the challenges in the city, the previous administration, started to appear. And my wife and I, our 4 kids were all out of the house, all through college. We were financially positioned reasonably well, but reasonably well. And I talked to my wife about running for mayor. It was a substantial pay cut, but I just felt like the city needed to change directions, and I thought maybe my business background and my banking background might be beneficial, and I think it's proven that was the case, but my wife said okay, so then I went to the bank because this was different. My request at the bank this time when I talked to Pat Botts and then Dave Heater at the bank was, I want to run for mayor. I think I can really make a difference in this city, but I need 2 things. Number 1, if I run and lose, I want to make sure I can keep my position.
Yeah.
And they agreed to that. And then I said, if I run and win, I'm going to give you notice for the end of the year. And, I won't be in my position because I'll be mayor starting January 1st. And they agreed, felt like it would be good for the city if I were there. Ended up getting voted in and started moving forward at that point. So that's how it all became. It was all about signs on tall poles on McGalliard is what got my interest in politics, and got on the council and then was able to see some things from the council viewpoint, which handles the finances, that I could see that the government was going down a bad road.
Yeah, so I'm not originally from around here. I went to Ball State, but I started my businesses here, and I want to say a few things. I loved living here. Sad we left. It was hard when you have 3 kids in your family. You know, it was further away. So we did move away about 4 or 5 years ago. But this is an unbelievable place to start a business. Huge community, pretty like even more than other towns I've been into. Massive community of businesses and people who want people to be successful. Very affordable. I think maybe one of the most affordable places in the.
Actually, I think U.S. News either last year or the year before, number one most affordable college town in the United States.
Yeah, and you have a lot of amenities too. You said like the White River Path, which I don't know how many miles it is. It's pretty long though.
Yeah, the Cardinal Greenway is 62 miles, and then the White River, which connects to that, crosses it actually, is another 6 or 7 miles, and is within just a few blocks of connecting with another trail, which will take it on into Yorktown.
Yeah, and just like, you know, if you're a runner, biker, like that path gets a lot of miles on it for sure. The downtown, you know, I came here in 2009 to now it's so vibrant compared to what it used to be. It has a ton to offer, but there definitely has always kind of been this stigma of like Muncie's never going to change for a long time, and getting involved. And that's one thing, you know, I really wanted to tap on as you running, what that was like, what maybe was a lot different than you thought it was going to be. And then you got in at a really, really hard time. I remember, you know, hearing that you won, and I was really excited for you and excited for Muncie to just have kind of a fresh start, because it really was. It was like a good amount of the staff was replaced, and then COVID hits.
Yes.
Yeah, like what?
I remember.
Yeah, it was like within, you know, the first few months, and this is just like Muncie has so much potential, like to be a great destination to raise a family, start a business, and you know, I'm just kind of excited to hear kind of what that journey has been like for you. So maybe start with running and what that was like, and you know, what that experience was like for you and your family, and then into like starting the position and getting into that.
Yeah. So with the family, it became very stressful. They are, even though they're not running for office, they become part of the narrative, and they shouldn't, but they do. It just happens, and so I think there were parts of that were very difficult, and things would be said that weren't true, and sometimes on social media, people make comments. They're not verified, at least with the paper. In a newspaper, I think those articles are verified to an extent before they publish them. But on social media, that's not always the case. And that I could let it roll off my back, and I wouldn't respond. But it was difficult for family members to read things that's not even true.
Yeah.
And I would say, don't say anything. Don't get in an argument. Don't get in a conversation online. So those were challenges, but it became pretty clear early on as I was knocking on doors, and I knocked all over the city, some areas a couple of times. It became pretty obvious that the public also was looking for a fresh start.
Yeah.
And so that went well, and we ended up getting around 60% of the vote. And so it was pretty overwhelming, and we started putting together the process of filling up those department heads, which is something that I had told those who were supporting me. I had told, and I ran as a Republican.
Yeah.
So I told the Republican Party. I told everybody. I told the citizens as I'm doing this, I'm going to run this like a business. I'm going to put the best people in play, in positions to where they can do the most for the city and run their departments. So there were 12 department heads, and this is just my style. We actually did interviews on all of them. We went through interview processes, so nobody was promised a position and given a position. We did interviews. We asked for applications. I set up a committee to help me with that, and it had both Republicans and Democrats on it. the committee did, and then they would make recommendations, and then I would do final interviews and make a decision. Well, 4 of the people that I appointed of the 12 were people I had not even met before the interview, and but that they were qualified. The controller was one in particular. I didn't want that to be a political appointment. No. That is I need somebody not that's receiving some type of job for helping me, but I need somebody who's going to help us as a city turn around those finances.
Yeah.
But that was one of the 4 that I didn't know, and I did appoint 4 Democrats as well.
Yeah.
Which didn't make all the Republicans happy, and Bruce Amigos, but they were the best people for the job. And so I think some of the success we've had is that I really tried to take and have taken the private industry world methods for hiring and departments that I think that's been helpful and created some success. So so I didn't appoint people for political reasons.
Yeah.
Several were Republican, but we went through interviews on all of them, and I'm proud of that. And it's exactly what I said I was going to do.
Yeah, and I think I had. Do you know John Costas? He's the mayor. He was the mayor of Valparaiso.
I have met him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I know him well.
Yeah. Really, really great guy. But we had because I had him on the podcast, and we talked, and because he's been involved at politics at different levels in Indiana. And what he said is, like, really at a local level, at a city level, being a Republican or a Democrat really doesn't matter that much.
I agree.
I think it's given so much power in our culture of just like, you are this or you are that. It's like, who do you think is going to run the city well? Regardless, like, they're not going to affect your federal tax income or your state tax income or
inflation
taxes,
rates.
It's like, who's going to make the city look good? Who's going to make sure the roads are taken care of, Yep. And I think there's just too much. It's just weighted too high on that for a lot of people in their minds. It's like, just get the person in there who's the best for the job, And I've actually met. I've heard stories of people who are like, well, I traditionally am a Democrat, but I'm going to run as a Republican because there's no one running on that side on local elections, because it's like. Because it doesn't actually matter for the actual policies. There's no set of policies you have to really follow inside of a local election.
That is true.
Yeah,
that is true. When and I know you may have a question, but I was going to say there were 3 main things that we discovered. We knew, but we confirmed when we took office that there were some financial challenges. The city accounts were $3.3 million. Negative. Yeah. 1.9 of that was the street department. It just meant that there was cash in one big account, but they're supposed to go to these various line items.
Yeah.
And so they had overspent on some things, so that was one. So financially, we knew we had to fix something. Secondly, we were down to 86 police officers, and we're supposed to have 110. And when you're trying to keep your city safe, you need to be fully staffed. And that was a substantial concern of mine and ultimately of my new police chief. So we knew we needed to handle that. And the equipment was old, and similar challenges with the fire department. They were staffed much higher, but the equipment and the buildings need work. And then the third area was roads. Mm-hmm. The streets had not been given the attention that they probably should have. Part of that was the fact, and I hired one from day one, was there had been no city engineer for 10 or 20 years. Yeah. And you need that expert, again, not making it a political opponent. And the city engineer I hired was a Democrat, by the way. But I needed that engineer mindset and qualification to help turn around the street department and get the roads in a proper shape. So we hired a city engineer, but those were the three areas. So it was the finances, the public safety, and the roads were three things that we immediately knew we had to fix.
Yeah, that was actually, you answered part of the question I was going to ask next. So you come into office, were things better than you expected them to be or worse than you expected them to be? As in, like, overall, what you were walking into and what needed to be cleaned up?
Well, what I did find, I'm not a micromanager. That's not my style. So when I had branches, I had 15 branches at Mutual.
And how many employees would that have been that were
About
under you?
110.
Yeah.
I had about 110 employees. And now I had 515. So it was a big jump at the city. It's a much larger responsibility. But you'll have to go back and re-ask that question. I can't remember.
Yeah, I guess more, because I'm familiar with the challenges that were surrounding Muncie, what you were coming into. Was it...
Oh, worse or better?
Yeah. Did you have a lot more to deal with than you thought you were going to have to, or did you actually find that it ended up being more manageable than anticipated?
In the end, it ended up being more manageable. I had said that I'm not a micromanager, and I think it's my impression. I don't know that it's accurate. It's my impression that a previous couple, maybe 3 mayors, had been very involved in all decisions.
Yeah.
And I wanted to put quality people in as department heads and let them make the decisions, have them come to me with questions and where they needed help in order to run their departments properly. And so that was a management shift, but we did find that there were many people who were concerned about doing something without my approval. And it took a while to get people to this is the right thing. Go ahead, do it. You don't need me to tell you to do this particular activity.
Did you to facilitate that? And I think the biggest way where you don't have to be a micromanager is when you have really good policies in place and SOPs. Did you spend a lot of time on that in the beginning? Like, hey, this is like your decision-making process. This is what I need to be presented with so I can give you guidance. Did you spend a lot more time on that rather than in a lot of meetings or training, or how did you facilitate that?
Yeah, so we did it a couple of ways. A couple areas on the financial side, I knew some challenges. When I was on the council, I put forth an ordinance that would have tightened the state IC codes, the Indiana codes, to where you had to get some quotes before you could just buy something or get some type of service. So I had put it forth in the city council when I was on the council, and it got voted down. This was before I was elected mayor. Well, we immediately put that back on the agenda, and the council approved it unanimously, the new council, because it changed over along with my change. And so it made it, if anything over $5,000, you had to have multiple bids.
Yeah, which is
quotes.
pretty standard.
Well, the state, you really only have to do it over a certain amount.
Yeah.
But I wanted it at a lower level. And as long as they were doing that, I felt like if we have a reason why this company or this particular product was purchased, then I can feel comfortable with that. So that was one of the things. So we did a couple legislative things with the council, and then we started looking at standard operating procedures throughout.
Yeah.
One of the areas that we started with was police, because they were so understaffed. The morale was not great. There were some federal indictments for some brutality and paperwork not being done, and some of those are still going on. I mean, there's nobody left for. Most have pled guilty, but there's still some sentencing going on that. And those were 2018 and before. But so we put in procedures to eliminate those. We changed the training procedures in the police department, and we've done a lot of procedural changes in HR, as far as hiring practices, so that you're still allowed to hire. I mean, family members can still work for the city, but we just don't. We want to make sure they're not working for a family member. You have to be in a different department. So we put in a lot of procedural changes, And where we felt like we need a little bit more teeth, we did some ordinances. And then we also started doing ethics trainings for the department heads. We do them now for all employees, just reminding people that we're here to serve, that we're here to, number one, all of our funds are coming from everyone else. It's from the taxes and or fees that we earn as a city is how we're paying for things. So we have certain responsibilities. There are codes and expectations from the state and the federal governments. And we just wanted to make sure that all of those are pretty ingrained, and we've seen dramatic improvement in all of that.
Yeah, so I think you kind of like pinpointed something about like a culture of like service. And my main company that I run, we work with schools all over the United States, and like that is something like at every one of our meetings, and it's like in kind of our ethos, I would say, is we work for government agencies in education. And like we have a responsibility to be as efficient and as frugal as possible so we can pass those savings along to our customers. And it's so important because if you forget what you're doing, like why you're doing what you're doing, it can become a lot about yourself and not about the people you're serving. And you kind of also touched on it too, like nepotism. I know that was a huge challenge here in Muncie in general, just a lot of people being hired in maybe weren't vetted or didn't deserve the job. This is years and years ago. But that is important because if you don't feel like if you're working in an organization, you say like, well, I'm behind his or her son and I'm not going to be promoted before them, but I'm doing way more work or better quality, you're not going to get the best people in.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to be able to retain them long term.
Yeah, it impacts the morale. Yeah. And not in a positive way.
No.
It impacts it in a negative way. So those are some of the things that we did early on, and then in addition to COVID,
Yeah. So walk me through that. You get elected. I believe you started in 2000, and then March of 2000, everything shuts down.
March of 2000, everything shut down. A lot of disasters happened due to COVID, but there was one positive. And the fact that nobody was able to do anything. Now, we never shut City Hall down. We had procedures in place. We moved some people so that people weren't as close together. Yeah. We did all those procedurally during COVID, but we never shut down. But it did help us because of the lack of activity across the state and the country and even in the city. It helped us get through those financial issues pretty quickly, compared to what it would have been if everybody had been out and about and driving and going to work and at the full regular scale that they had been. So it allowed us some time to get through the financial issues pretty quickly. I think by the end of year one, we were probably in 6 months, we really knew where we were financially. Yeah. And then once you know where you are and where you're trying to go, it's pretty easy to set the path.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good insight. I think coming into where you had a lot of unique problems to solve pretty quickly, it's like, we kind of like you have like a non-traditional period of time to really figure that out when everything is shut down. You don't really know what's going to be normal after that point. How did you find it really, really difficult with the public and everyone's different reaction to COVID and what precautions should be in place, what precautions are going to stop business, because if you stop business, people aren't working and so on and so forth. Can you kind of like talk a little bit about how you went about that and, for the best of the public and for the best of Muncie, how you made those decisions?
Yeah, well, number one, I'm a workaholic anyway, so I didn't want to go to work.
Yeah.
We were not set up. We're a little better now, but we were not set up as a city to work remotely.
Yeah.
We didn't have the technology. We just weren't ready for that type of activity. So we just wanted to make it safe for the employees in the building. Now, there were times where we went to appointments only from the public.
Yeah.
But we never shut down City Hall. As we tried to work through some of the challenges, I think I've kind of lost your question.
No, just how how just everyone had during COVID, everyone had a
Oh,
different
I know.
opinion
Okay.
about how to handle all of the regulations and how do
Yes.
you keep, how do you decide on keeping businesses open?
You
And
know,
yeah,
so what I really chose to do was when I was sworn in, I was sworn to follow the Constitution of the state of Indiana.
yeah,
And so I made the decision early on that that really put what we did based on what the governor was recommending.
yeah,
So we would watch the governor's update. If people remember, I think most of those were at 2 o'clock every day. And if there was some type of shift or change, we would follow that because I felt like I was sworn to follow the state constitution. And I felt like that was the direction I should go. Locally, I remember there were discussions with the Board of Health and government officials, city, county, not just Muncie, but also Yorktown and other small communities in our area on what we should be doing. And there was talk at one point of shutting almost everything down.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like that. I said, if you shut down, because banks were one, because people go into some people go into the bank, and that can cause. And I said, if you shut down the banks, you're going to have panic. So So we worked through that. Ended up not shutting down all those industries, but putting some other restrictions and so forth to help protect people. But there were a lot of meetings. We did a daily update, usually after the governor's update. Then we kind of switched it to the following morning, because people were watching the governor, and then we would reemphasize those changes and then do any specific for Muncie. But there was a lot of communication, and there was a lot of push on both sides. We had people reaching out to us that we should shut down, the city should shut down, nobody should leave their house. So we had people calling us and telling us that.
yeah,
And we also had people, it's my right to, it's my right. If I want to risk it, I should do it. So we had those phone calls as well. And you just try and make the proper decisions, and we pretty much left it on individuals. The way we said we're not going to. We decided the Muncie Police Department was not going to ticket a business that stayed open, unless it was required by the governor,
the governor, yeah.
that you can't have this type of business open. So we just weren't going to do that, and we indicated that, and I remember we told people that many times, because they'd say, I saw this business open and they're not supposed to be, but it was not one that was required to be shut down. So, you just try and make the best decision, and obviously we got through it. Others got through it. Some cities were more restrictive. Others might have been more open.
Yeah.
But we all got through it, and we hope to not have to go through that ever again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I get to come back about twice a year. Just recently, my first companies that I started here in Muncie and Anderson, I just sold last year or so. I'm not in town. We still have family and friends and church friends. But the city is looking really good. I mean, it's looked better than I can remember over the last, it's been 14 years. And I want to say you've done, from what I can see, a great job, and I've heard good things. So I always like to have like a personal section on leadership and more of what you do in your personal life. So obviously you have an extremely stressful job, or at least seems like to me.
It can be, yeah.
What are you doing on your personal time to maintain good mental health and physical health and manage that stress? Kind of, what do you do to fill your tank?
Yeah. For me, my personality style, it's alone time.
Yeah.
And for me, it's running. So I enjoy running. I don't run with music. I run with my thoughts. Mm-hmm. I run by myself. I don't run with others. It's not that I'm opposed to running with others, but that is my time. And I tend to run before work. I don't do it every day, but I exercise in some fashion 7 days a week.
Okay.
I feel like that's important. I want to keep flexibility if I can. I do something I call it stretching. It's maybe mild yoga.
Yeah.
But I do it on my own based on what a physical therapist taught me here locally when I had an injury, and I continue to do that and add to it. And, and some basic stuff, sit-ups and push-ups, but mostly stretches that were recommended. So I do that on non-run days. But for me, it's that time of running. And for me, that's a time when I communicate with God, and just get my thoughts together for the day. And that's really helped me. I'm a big music fan as well. I like light jazz and classical. I played cello in high school. And so music's another way that I can get some of that stress gone, but mostly it's exercise.
And that's awesome. I think stretching is insanely overrated. I mean, sorry, insanely underrated. When I'm like in my best like mental like health state, that's when I'm stretching every day. And it's funny, not to make excuses, but like young kids and everything, it's like, oh, I could start at 5 a.m. I could start at 6:30, and I haven't been as disciplined as I've wanted to be in the past. But stretching has been really, really helpful. And then I'm similar. I would say probably 2 out of 3 runs, I don't listen to anything. I'm just running. And it is really, I also don't like running with people. I agree with that. But it's kind of liberating kind of in a way.
Yeah.
Just to kind of get out.
Now, I start my day the same way every day. And I start with drinking 16 ounces of water.
Okay. Then
I read the Bible. And I'm going from front to back, and then I do it over and over and over, however long, but I'm not reading deep into the Bible. I have then a devotion that I read, and then I read a book, and it's usually on, the one I'm reading now is called Trusted Leaders.
Okay.
It's a newer release, but I read on what can help me as a person be better at what I do. I read some history and biographies. I like to see what others did. I really admire like Churchill and Lincoln. They went through some really challenging situations, but I read read some history, but I read a book, what ends up being about 50 books a year, and I have for 20 years. So after I do that is when I do my stretching and or running.
What time are you waking up in the morning typically?
About 5.
Okay.
I get up early.
And then you get into the office around 8 o'clock?
Yeah, 7:30 to 8.
Yeah, that's a good time. So for you in your career, did you have like maybe, can you pinpoint maybe some advice you had or a mentor that you had that really helped you and kind of guided you through your career and making decisions? I know for me, like I can pinpoint multiple times in my career where I had advice or people really like took time to mentor me, and it really helped me. Do you have any of those that have really helped you?
There's a few. And I'll give you 3. Well, I'll give you 4. One on the banking side of things, a gentleman named Bert Weaver, who's a banker. He's now retired. He's in Frankfort, Indiana now, but he worked at Merchants National Bank when they had the green briefcases and all of those kind of things, and they were downtown. They since had been purchased, but he gave me a lot of help on the banking and business world and what people were looking for in employees, and I took that to heart. I always understood that if I spent more time on my job than was expected and got better results than was expected, that I would move up. And it certainly happens. It does happen. So I think those who think I want to do as little as possible and still get paid full-time pay, they're making a mistake. It is visible, and it doesn't move you up the ladder if that's what your goal is. People have different goals. So he was one. I had a gentleman named Phil Hevlin who owned a meat market in downtown Frankfort, and I would go to him twice a week and for lunch, and he taught me investing. So
Really?
he was an investor. He's long since passed, but yeah, it was stocks, so he would show me what he was doing, what was working, how to pick ones, and so forth. So I've had a fair amount of success in investing, and I attribute a lot of that to Phil Hevlin.
Your local butcher.
The local butcher.
Yeah.
It was Main Meat Market. Yep, that's what it was in Frankfort, Indiana. Yeah. And then my dad, who was a pastor, has passed away about 3 years. Well, it was 3 years ago. Yeah. This past July. He had the ability to make everybody that he talked to feel like they were the most important person in his life. And one of the ways he would say that helped me was he always said, smile. When you first meet somebody, smile and look for a compliment.
Yeah.
You don't have to say it, but if you look for a compliment, it changes your whole perspective about that person. So it could be something they're wearing, or their smile, or their eyes, or, and sometimes you'd mention it, but sometimes you wouldn't. But the relationships and how you treat people was one thing he taught me. And then as far as the discipline, there was an author, he's long since passed. His name was Jim Rohn, okay. Rohn. And I would encourage people to go to YouTube and look up Jim Rohn. Rohn is his last name. Mm-hmm. He was the mentor to Tony Robbins.
Oh, wow.
A mentor to many people. And I have probably 8 or 9 of his books. I have some of his series. Some were on cassette, which I don't use now. But usually I just go to YouTube. But about daily discipline in particular, he's a great person to listen to, and he was very prominent back in the 70s and 80s, but it applies to today. What you do each day determines where you're going to be tomorrow, and repeating positive steps every day. Which is why I drink water, read the Bible, read a book, and exercise every day. Something. Every day. I don't think I've missed for 10 or 15 years. Jim Rohn was a big part of that. So those are 4 that have had a big impact on me, and all in different areas.
Do you have can you remember a specific, kind of talk about your dad with smile, find something to compliment? I like that. I think, small talk is just it's not beneficial. I feel like in a lot of ways, getting to know people in a deeper way is so important. And doing that, you can do that in a very quick way too. But do you have can you remember a saying or a quote that you find yourself repeating consistently throughout your day or throughout your weeks as you go on?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something I repeat every day to myself. So I'll just put it out there. My purpose in life is to touch people in a positive way. I smile at everyone I meet and look for compliments to give.
Yeah.
I say that every day. Every day I say that to myself. So I'm not one that would be good at walking in this room and saying something's out of place, or noticing that this little piece is wrong or doesn't match. That's not me. I would come in and talk about, hey, I look at more positive things.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
And I think that's served me well. Other people get served by other methods, but for me, that has served me well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really respect that too. I think, self-discipline, you're seeing more and more research on people the CEO of GM. They asked him what's the number one indicator you think someone will be successful in your business. He says someone who exercises every day. That's what he said. And I agree. It's such a good self-discipline. If you're doing those little things, and they're not really little things, but if you're doing those little things every day, you're going to continue to improve, rather than because you're increasing your threshold of output and knowledge and physical and mental fortitude in that area. So coming back, you're getting into election year. Mm-hmm. Where is Muncie now? And then if you're elected 4 more years, do you have any really big goals you're looking to accomplish? Do you have any like initiatives that you're really looking to accomplish in the next 4 years if you're elected?
Yeah, I'm wanting to see some population growth.
Yeah.
We've gotten to where we're stable. If you look at after the 21 estimate and the 22 estimate, we're listed at 0.0. That's an improvement.
Yeah.
It's not where we want to be. But I also know that, and I'll just give you an example. We in 2020 we started construction of an apartment building downtown.
Yeah.
That's market rates, right on the river, the White River Lofts, 55 apartments. Actually started by the previous administration, and we continued it and got it built. It's been 100% occupied. But here's the thing that we found. Our 2 largest employers are Ball State University and IU Health Ball Hospital.
Yeah.
70% of the people that moved into that apartment building were people who already worked in Muncie but were commuting in from other counties, primarily Hamilton County.
Yeah.
And so what it determined to me is that there are people who want to live here, but they just there haven't been the housing options that they needed. So that's one of the reasons that we're building the city is building a subdivision.
Yeah.
And so that it'll be available for builders to put in homes. That's why we're looking at more apartments to go up, market rent, but we've also done a lot of affordable housing. Altogether in the first 2.5 years, we've put in 270 units between houses, affordable and market available. So we know we've been good at getting those types of funding and those types of developments. And that population growth will then bring the other pieces.
Yep.
It'll bring the businesses. It'll bring employees for the businesses. It'll bring the retail. It will help revitalize everything. And if you bring people here and keep the residents that you already have here, then you're going to have that population growth. And along those lines, people who are living in Hamilton County but working here are paying their county taxes, have been going to Hamilton County. Now they're coming to us. It didn't cost us any more, but now their county tax comes to us here in Delaware County and to Muncie. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so adamant about bringing people. We've had great success. We're now over 50 families have moved here from remote workers.
Yeah.
And we've been part of the Make My Move program through the state. And now that we've had enough success that the state is funding half of it, we fund the other half. And these are people who keep their current jobs. They work remotely. Most of them are coming from the East and West Coasts. Actually, we have more from Pittsburgh area than anywhere else. But from the East and West Coast, because you had mentioned earlier, I believe, about the affordability.
Oh, yeah.
And so they can sell their house on the West Coast, pay cash for something here, have money in the bank, and live like kings because they keep their job. And so that's been very exciting for us. And we at Muncie and Noblesville were in a LA Times article about how Los Angeles is losing and California is losing people to small rural communities in the Midwest. Yeah. And the two they talked about were Noblesville and Muncie. So I was rather proud of that. LA Times article.
Yeah, so I tell people this, it blows their minds. Me and my wife, and we're like extremely debt adverse. Like the only debt I have now is actually because I had to get a mortgage. When you move to Valparaiso, it's drastically more expensive. We bought our first house in Muncie, cash, for $20,000. And it was a great house. We had to put about $15,000 into it. We did a lot of the work ourselves. It was a great house. I had a detached garage. It was great.
Yeah.
You know, and it's obviously all pricing has gone up across the board.
Yes, it has.
But just even groceries are cheaper here. And you have a great downtown, a pretty big downtown, honestly.
Yeah.
And then you have the college. There's like stuff to do. You're fairly close to Fort Wayne, fairly close to Indianapolis. The Indianapolis airport's not too far. you could go from living in California, you could sell your house in California and probably retire here.
You could.
In your like late to mid 40s, if you worked a few years, not having that additional expenses of where you were living. This is a great place to live. A lot of communities, tons of non-for-profits that are involved in the community.
Yes.
I'm really excited to see what the next few years hold.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you do, and hopefully things go your way in the election. And I really appreciate you being a guest.
My pleasure. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.